What up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Black Expat Podcast. My name is Carl, and I'm excited to be rocking with you guys for yet another episode. I am so excited to be joined by an amazing guest today. And sometimes I like to do these intricate introductions where I highlight a bunch of amazing things, but sometimes the guest is so special that they need to do it themselves because one, I don't want to miss anything, and two, they are just that amazing. So, welcome to the show, Adrienne. Please introduce yourself. Tell us about your background, where you are, what you're doing. And again, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, my name is Adrienne Waller, also known as the Worldwide Educator. And with my clubhouse room, I always say I started my expat journey at the age of 5. And since I've lived in Germany, South Africa, Qatar, China, Kuwait, and now I am in the Cayman Islands. I work as an assistant principal by day. In the evenings and weekends, I spend a lot of time supporting people who want to realize their dream abroad, want to get out of the classroom and elevate into other positions, want to transition. And that's kind of what I do in a really 30-second blurb about who I am.
So you said a lot in that 30-second amazing blurb, and I'm going to get to all of that. But I first want to get to, you ran through them countries pretty quickly. Can you say them one more time? Because first of all, just say it one more time because I have a whole lot of commentary regarding that.
So as a kid, I was in Germany.
Okay.
In college, I did research and was in South Africa. I finally, as an adult, was like, oh, I can leave America and still be an educator. I went to Qatar. I realized I deserved better. So I took a job in China. I went on a trip to see my cousin while I worked in China who lived in Australia. And COVID happened. And so I ended up in Kuwait. I realized Kuwait was not for me. And I said, deuces. And now I'm in the Cayman Islands.
Okay. And the Cayman Islands, the last word speaks volumes to me because it is an island. And then Cayman just sounds like money. So what is it like being in the Cayman Islands? Can you describe the Cayman Islands for people who don't know what it is and what it looks like at all?
It is beautiful. So when people are like, is it as beautiful as I think it is? Yes. Actually, pictures don't do it justice. I'm talking about beautiful water, no matter where you live, even if you're in a cheaper area, you're never far from water. It's a really small island. So literally the suburb that I'm from, a suburb of Detroit, which isn't even one of the biggest cities, is the same size as the population of the whole country. Not the geographic size, but the population size is equivalent. So it's about 60,000 people. So not big. So there's some very hometown feels that you get. Everybody know everybody. And, you go places, you're like, oh, I can't escape seeing people who, I work with, which is very different than being in Shanghai, where there's 25 million people. It was the biggest city in the world. These are very opposite. So that's an interesting dichotomy. They have a thing called Caymankind here, and it's very real. People are just really sweet and nice. When I first moved here, my realtor, it was struggling because transferring money out of America to a different country is mad hard. I didn't know that. I've always just sent money to America. I've never tried to get money out of America. Ooh, that's hard. So that's a whole nother conversation. But I couldn't get the money out, and I definitely couldn't get out to the Cayman Islands where they thought I was trying to launder some money. My realtor was like, "Oh, that's okay. I'll upfront pay 5,000 USD for you for your place, and I'll go buy you some stuff for your place so you're ready when you move in. And I've never met you." And then when a hurricane happened, she's like, "Oh, are you stuck by yourself? I will come pick you up and you can stay with me." This was my realtor, not a friend, not a coworker, my realtor. So there's just a lot of that. And I can go on and on for my first year here. I basically didn't buy a car. I borrowed cars, and people were like, "Oh, you're renting a car? Don't rent a car. Here's a car." And literally when somebody's like, "Oh, if you need anything, let me know." I was like, "Oh, well, if you just have a car laying around." She's like, "Actually, I do." I was like, wait, what? People have cars laying around? That's a thing? So yeah, it's just a really beautiful, but it's super expensive. So all of that said, all the beauty, you pay for it in every meal, every tank of gas, but there's a lot of free, beautiful things. I never thought I would love snorkeling. I love snorkeling, and I got my whole little kit, and I spent some more money, got some more expensive fins and prescription goggles. And, it's a great little thing to be able to do for free. I have my noodles and my beach chairs and my cooler. Like I'm beach ready. Like, oh, you want to go to the
Mm-hmm.
beach? I got you. So
That actually was one of my questions. I was going to be like, hey, you're on the island. Can you swim? Because, a lot of us historically, I don't want to say traditionally, historically, skip swim class in high school. And we go straight to basketball. But so
I
what's not
did. I
like
didn't learn to swim till I was 33.
me? I was 29. Hey, shout out to us for
Yep.
never saying never. Because I learned to
Yeah.
swim
I
at
was in
29. And
Qatar.
I'd been, like it's so easy, you know, like it was hard to get started, but it was definitely easy and definitely changed how I traveled because now I can seek the water for more than just laying by the pool having a drink. I can actually go in, do all the water sports that everybody else was doing that I didn't really get a chance to do before because I just couldn't swim.
So I was still doing water sports. I was like, life vest, prayer. Where now I'm like, oh, okay, I'll be okay even if that life vest doesn't work out. But yeah, I learned abroad. It was one of the gifts of being abroad was learning to swim.
Absolutely. And hey, me too. Same. I do want to take a few steps back though. So I know you are, and start with episode 2 is you are an international educator. You are a vice principal at an amazing institution. So how did you get started? And what led you down your chosen career path, which eventually led you to where you are now, which is the Cayman Islands?
So it's funny because I actually fought being a teacher. Like I knew as a child I wanted to be a teacher. And then people would say, oh, you're too smart to be a teacher. You should do something else. And so I looked into like doing medicine type of stuff, and I was going to be a children's hospital CEO. Yes, that's very nice and fancy. And then by the time I was finishing my degree at the University of Michigan, I was like, is that what I want to spend more money and more time on? It's like, yeah, I don't know about that. So I did AmeriCorps for a year and I worked with DC Public Schools at a nonprofit that did things around like parental engagement and did a program called Literacy Through Photography. Just through circumstance, the woman who was actually like who worked at the organization ended up quitting and I ended up running the program as like a first year kid out of college. Didn't know what I was doing, but did really well. But really realized through that and then some of the parental engagement work I was doing, I was like, how am I not a teacher? So I ended up doing Chicago Teaching Fellows, moving to Chicago, teaching there for 9 years. Um, After I lost my father, I kind of had to do like a mental reset, or sorry, 7 years. Did a mental reset, came back home to Metro Detroit, taught in Detroit for a couple of years, and it was in my second year in Detroit that I was at this table of leadership, and somebody started talking about teachers working in different countries. I was like, wait, I can leave America and work. She's like, not only can you leave America and work, but you probably are going to have a better work life balance. You can probably save money and you can travel. I was like, wait, come again? Like, I can do all of that? And she's like, yeah, you should look into it. I met my husband in Guatemala. We moved to the UAE. I was like, I might meet a man too. This is getting better. And then next thing you know, I'm looking it up and somebody contacts me from Qatar. Mind you, I was an ignorant black girl. I know Qatar was a country. I thought it was somewhere near. I thought it was near the UAE. I thought it was the UAE. Didn't know it's its own country, the richest country in the world. But I was like, sure, I'll talk to you. Why not? And next thing you know, I was on a flight moving to Qatar, and from there was just I also was doing some like part of me moving abroad was like, is education really still for me? Or should I look into something else? Should I move into nonprofit work? I was really exhausted by the American education system. I was exhausted by like what evaluation looked like, what collaboration looked like, or didn't. And so for me, this was like a last ditch effort to see if I was still in education. I was like, well, it's either going to go well now or it's not. And then I'll just come home. And it ended up being probably, I tell people it's probably the best adult decision I've ever made was deciding to move abroad because that opened the door to like leadership, to renew confidence in myself as an educator and things like that.
Okay, and the thing is, like, I can definitely relate. One, I never thought I would ever be a teacher. Didn't go to school for it. Didn't do any of that. But I ended up falling into it, and I, eventually became the director of an international program abroad in Taiwan to research and things like that. But it was such. It all kind of just happened, and it was somebody introducing something that was so unknown to me. Then like, kind of putting the pieces together. Like, wait, so you're saying I can do all of these amazing things, and the money is important, but also traveling is important, and also the work-life balance, right? Because right now everything is about balance. COVID kind of threw everything out of whack. And now we're all kind of just trying to find that balance between enjoying life, having, income, family, all that. And that's just kind of amazing. But I can imagine there's a lot of competition in the international education space. So, how would you describe that competition? And then how did you navigate that to reach the level of success that you have now?
That's a really good question because I also think that competition is steadily increasing as people become more disenchanted with education in their home countries, because that's not just an American phenomenon. That's something that's happening in the UK, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, Canada. Like, and Canada is not even the same because Canada is really more people want to be teachers than are available jobs. So that's a different problem. But as more people are seeking additional opportunities to leverage their teaching degree, um, you're going against stiffer competition. One thing that I can say that the US does really well that can help you stand out is understanding and how to support students who learn differently. So like IDEA, which is a long-standing act in the United States from 1984, gives so much rights and support to students who, learn and physically are different. And so as a US trained educator, you naturally have a skill set that may actually be something that differentiates you from your peers. That's not enough, though. I think being able to have a clear understanding of your why and what you're doing, which is something I feel like I have a very clear understanding of why I do this work, how I want to do this work, how I want to show up, is able to translate into interviews, is able to translate into forming connections. Because part of the international world is not just being able to have a strong resume, which most people got these old school resumes that they
Oh
made
my
on
goodness.
MS Word. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, boo boo. That are 4 pages and ain't nobody reading past page 1.5. So, like, those things. But a willingness to learn, I think, has always helped me in being able to apply those things in practice in a practical way, because there's a science of education, right? And so like how, it works in the research and all of that. But then there's a reality, the art of it. And so I think being able to really smoothly pair both the art and the science together has been really, really helpful to make me competitive. But it is a competitive market. And most people don't realize, like right now, when we're recording this beginning of November, I know multiple people who've already accepted their offers for next year. Right. So this is really early, where the US timeline is normally like April-ish is when you're really looking for next year. No, like by April, you at the bottom of the barrel in options in the international world. You can get out of good school by fluke at that time. After that, somebody quits late, something happens. But for the most part, good, strong schools, particularly if you're looking into leadership positions, they've already started hiring and things like that. Some people, principal jobs, can start hiring the August before the year they're
Yeah, that's a
going,
longer
you
process.
know. Yeah.
So like what, and this is kind of it's a question I'm curious about too, for your perspective on, obviously, because I'm asking it. Shut up, y'all. Listen, don't laugh at me. What kind of people do you think are suited to have the lifestyle that you've developed? And I'm not just talking about the traveling aspect of it, right? Like get into the work that you actually have to do, your day to day in and day out, what you have to sacrifice as a result of being where you are, but also areas in where you thrive as well. Like what kind of person do you think is able to handle and deal with, and not just handle and deal with, but also thrive in the environment that you're in on a day-to-day basis?
I think one of the biggest things is being patient and flexible. I think
Mhm.
that anywhere you move, like, like I look at all the different places I've been, and I think when you go into there with expectations of your new place being like the place you left, you're already setting yourself up for some disaster right there. And that's not just of country, but that's of school, that's of communities, of people. Each one is functions a little bit differently, and there's ways that they're very similar, but ways that they're really different. And you definitely have to be patient. Someone recently taught me the phrase urgent patience. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, that's really like being urgently patient. And I think that's like a really good skill to have, is like working with, like having that like urgency to get things done, but having a patience to let things happen at the pace and the rate that you want. Cause they just look so different. So that's one. And then that flexibility, the thing, people are going to operate and do things different than what you're used to. And you're going to want to come and say, at my old school, And not that there's not value in what you did at your old school, but this isn't your old school. And there's multiple ways this may be different from your old school. This not just country location, but the culture, the income and salaries of people. Like, when I was in the United States, I mainly worked at like lower income schools, like people who, we had high free and reduced lunch rates and things like that. Where abroad, I'm talking to people. I remember I was talking to a parent at the end of last school year, and I was like, they're like, oh yeah, we fly out Saturday at 2. And I was flying out Saturday at 2. I was like, oh, are you on United? They're like, no, we're on our private jet. I was like,
Oh,
oh,
wow.
like it was a whole reality check. Like, oh, you have your own plane.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to get a seat in regular class. Like, and so even how you operate and function with them is different. So that ability to be flexible, take feedback is going to really serve you well.
And then, so, can you talk a little bit about the leadership experiences that you've had, right? Because you're an assistant principal now. And like, what is something that, when you took on this role that you immediately thrived in? And then what are some things that when you took on that role that were some hurdles that you had to overcome, as a person, as an individual, and also as a Black woman as well?
Ooh, I might answer them in the opposite order. I know you should start with the positive, but I'm going to end on a positive. One of the things that was really hard is that naturally, as Black women, we're super passionate, and there's a way in which I speak with a conviction that works really, really well lots of the time. But when you're in leadership and you're trying to vacillate between so many different people with so many different age ranges, different ethnicities, different sets of experience, different tolerance for directness, different tolerance for passion and things like that. That can be really difficult. And that's definitely an area I think I'm even still now figuring out, like, how do I not lose me? Because I don't want to lose who I am. I don't want to lose what makes Adrienne special and unique and a lovely person. But I also don't want to isolate people and people to not feel like I'm there and supportive. So that's something that I'm learning, like that's a constant reflection point, being able to be a listener, because as a leader, you want to be a problem solver, but you really have to be a really good listener. Like sometimes people are coming to you not to solve their problems. They're coming to you just to be an ear, to be, somebody to bounce ideas off of. So I've learned to really respond with questions instead of responding with answers. So tell me a little bit more about that. Well, how else could you handle that? What's an alternative? Where might you start? What might happen if you do it that way? Have you considered? So really doing things that force the educator to think and to question and to come up with a solution themselves and not feel like I have to be the solution. Where I thrive is I'm good with people, like for even in the space of what I'm saying, I'm good with people because I'm very authentic. Like I've learned to just accept Adrienne for all that is she, all that is me, I'm cool with. Like, and not just cool with, I think I'm a beautiful person inside and out. I know I have a wealth of things to offer and a wealth of things to learn. And I think because I'm able to just stand firm in who I am, I also make space for other people to do that as well. Like I allow other people to be their full authentic self and to take risks about sharing who they are in ways that traditionally they may not, because it hasn't felt like a safe space. So I'm really good about creating safe space, about being who I am. And, just like I'll say stuff and people like, did the assistant principal just say that? Like I'll see a kid like, what up, homie? Like, talking to like a 6-year-old and they're like, homie, or like I'll climb up the logs, like there's like a log structure. Like, Miss Adrienne, what are you doing? Climbing the logs? Teachers aren't allowed to be up here. Where's that rule? Where's
Right.
that at? And they're like, I guess it's not. And then one kid go tell me, well, you're gonna break it. You too big. I was like, I said it hasn't broke yet. I think we okay. So just being able to be really authentic, I think has helped me thrive both in the interview process, but also in the work that I do. Is that I'll tell teachers when I don't know, I'll say, oh, I don't know. Let's look at that together. Let's figure that out. Or, oh yeah, that's something I have a lot of experience with. Would you like my support in that? So those are ways that I think I've really thrived. And as a Black woman, I've just accepted there are ways that I am unique and different in that space that both help the space, but also, there are times where I have to check things in a way that make sure I'm being inclusive, but not losing, like I said, but not losing me at the same time.
And that is a delicate balance, right? Being inclusive and making sure that you're respectful of the culture that you're in, but at the same time, doing it in a way that you feel like you are being your natural holistic self. Because that's something that I definitely struggle with. I will say, just think about the things you talked about before that as well. Something that I learned from teaching was patience. I did not have that. What I've learned and I had to relearn, I always say I'm always relearning things I thought I knew a lot about. There's always more to learn. Was empathy. And empathy to me is leading with like responding in a way that's inclusive of the other person's thoughts, feelings, and opinions and ideas. And the difference is when you're speaking culture to culture, sometimes I can get what you're saying and I don't, and you get my response because we have that cultural connection, right? Whether it's black to black, white to white, whatever that may be, there is that connection. But when you're abroad, and honestly, when you're at work, no matter where you are abroad or back at home, everybody doesn't have that cultural connection or that immediate connection with you. So you kind of have to lead with, like you said, very good follow-up questions like, hey, if I'm venting to you, if I'm asking you for something, maybe my response isn't to direct you somewhere. Maybe I need more context to be the best leader that I can be to actually guide you where you're trying to go instead of immediately trying to direct you there. There's a difference between directing and guiding. And that's something I learned through teaching for one, but also just my experiences with being abroad is that is a very fine line to toe. So what has been like one of your most rewarding experiences you've had in educational leadership while working abroad? And if you wouldn't mind just comparing and contrasting that, not necessarily comparing, but also speaking to something that you did when you were back home or in a place that you spent a little bit more time in as well. Just how those experiences weighed for you, and how you kind of digested them given the circumstances and the place where you were residing.
So there's two places where I felt really, really successful in leadership. The first was when I was in Qatar and I was working at schools that were really struggling. And I was able to step into a leadership role where I was doing essentially teacher training and development. And so it's not like a recently I had a teacher, maybe in the last month from when I worked in Qatar, who thanked me for the work that I did when I lived in Qatar. And I moved from Qatar in 2019. And she's like, thank you so much for what you did, what you taught me. I still to this day use so much of what I learned from you, which for me is like, wow, that means I worked there in 2019 as the last time. I worked with her 2018, 2019, then 2020, 2021, and now we're in 2022. So there's 5 classes of kids just from that one teacher who have been impacted from the work that I did with her, right? And so to me, that's a pretty amazing thing to be able, that's the thing I love about leadership is the ripple effect of your leadership and how many kids you can really touch. So right there, even if she's only teaching a class of 25 people, kids, I've affected over 100 lives. And that's just one teacher, right? And I've gotten those messages from a few other people. And so having that is just really powerful. So that's one. And then more recently, just this week, at 2 teachers. So at my school, we have an SST process, student support team. And so this is where we look at students who are struggling, whether it's with like behavior, social, emotional, or academics. And we kind of take deep dives and look at them and figure out interventions and support to give to them. Last year, we were meeting monthly, and there was a lot of gaps in that. And so at the end of the year, I said, hey, you all, we're going to start meeting weekly. Now, as a leader, to tell your teachers you take a prep every week is not like once a week is not an easy thing. And so I knew I was working against like people wanting time because you can never get time back, but you can if meetings are actually productive and meaningful. And so changed it to meeting monthly, gave structure to what it meant to talk about students because I felt like last year we were having good conversations, but sometimes they weren't focused on solutions and action and what to do. It was a lot of venting because they didn't know what to do. So we changed that structure of how we talked about students. But then we added in student work and data meetings where we dive into looking at actual student works that they're producing and looking at the data that we've gotten from the work that students produce to have a really more holistic way of looking at our students. And I had 2 different teachers just on their own, just this week, say, thank you. I really appreciate this new process. And I was like, yeah, I was worried because it's, once a week, it's a lot of time. They're like, yeah, but it's good time. And I feel like we've done so much more in the few months of school. It's only the beginning of November. than we likely did all school year last year. And that just meant a lot to me. That was very, very rewarding. I think you had a second part of the question that I forgot.
You already touched on it, so don't you worry about it. That was actually an amazing response to it. I do want to shift a little bit now until the travel aspect of the work that you've done, because I mean, the work in education is amazing. And again, assistant principal, hello. It's a job that I wanted once upon a time. And I just love people in leadership who are doing their thing abroad. But what passions, if any, have you discovered just from travel in general? And how have you been able to travel as a result of the work that you've done in education abroad as well?
Yeah, abroad definitely opened up. Like, I mean, my first year abroad, I went to 20 countries, like, was it 2019? No, the first year was 12. I went to one a month. That's what it was. Within my first 3 years, I cleared $30,000 of debt while traveling to like over 20 countries. So that was pretty amazing. Was like to both, and then I still had fun. Like I still kicked it. I still did brunch. We went to, paintball. Like I did all of the things which would have never happened in the US. When I was in the US, I was happy to do one kind of nice trip a year. You know what I mean? That I saved all year for versus now everybody's like, you stay in your country for your break? Like, well, where you going next time? And so like that, like travel's just been amazing. And it's been amazing because my mom's been able to travel and visit me. And that's been something really special is to have her see my life abroad. And we've gone to countries together. So I think my mom and I alone have been in like 5 countries together. So that's just been really nice and special. I was on the phone with my family before here and talking about where we're going to go and like when my brother's going to come visit, and it's been amazing. And then some of it I just applied to speak at a conference. Hopefully I get accepted. That'll be in Guatemala. I'm going to be on an accreditation team and going to Puerto Rico. So there's both work ways that I've been able to travel, but you have more time off, you have more flexible income, and you're surrounded by people who also have a joy and a love for traveling. And so I never would have thought I would go to the Philippines, but being abroad opened me to like, oh, the Philippines would be a great place to travel. It's by far one of my favorites that I visited. I was really surprised at. And I think part of it was like I didn't think it would be so amazing. And travel's just opened up more understanding about who I am and, but who other people are and how unique the world is, how diverse it is, but how similar we are. Like, I mean, the reality is a big city is a big city. I'm not saying they're the same, right? But there are certain qualities that you just realize that once you're in a large city, there's certain ways that they work. There's public transportation, there's tall buildings, there's fast moving traffic. Like, that's just the quality. I don't care what language you're speaking, what climate you're in. That's a part of big city living, which is the same. But then when you start looking at it more detailed, it's like, oh, but did you know their malls have like roller coasters inside and their malls have, like fresh markets inside, and they don't actually have malls. They have everything is stripped. Like those parts are different. So it's neat to both layer both the similarities of places, but also really see the uniqueness. And I think in travel, particularly depending on how you do it, you start to see how colonialism, for lack of any better term, also affected the trajectory of countries and what's there and how different. Like, it was really interesting being in Greece, and I didn't realize how many different empires had kind of gone through Greece. And like learning about that and then seeing how all these empires impacted the culture that is now Grecian culture today was like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. Or being in being in Spain and seeing like different architecture that was really taken from the various empires that have come through, or even like how climate affects how people live. So like in Norway, having these houses built off the water, but having like a little house and then this bigger house. And I was like, oh, that's really dope. And it's been interesting to see how humans have adapted to both other humans invading and coming into their space, but also how natural disasters or natural climates also impact how you move and what foods you end up eating. Like, I didn't know tapas were a result of like people didn't have clean water. So people were drinking wine because wine was actually clean. But then people were at work trying to build stuff and drunk. And so this guy was like, no, so you got to give them food anytime you serve them a drink. And so they would give them a drink and put food on top, but it would just be big enough to cover the drink. And that's where tapas
Tapas
began.
came
Like,
from, yep.
yeah, like those things are just so cool and amazing to hear. Like, I didn't know a little plate really had this large history. So things like that have just been just an amazing thing. And how useful is me knowing where tapas came from? Probably not really useful, but it's super interesting.
Yeah, and again, it's something cool that you can walk away saying that, man, I learned something that you just wouldn't ordinarily learn by staying within your own environment and within the same place. And I tell people this all the time. I say, hey, it doesn't have to be leaving the country to get exposure to new and different things. It can be from state to state. I would always encourage people to go out and see different parts of the world, because the world is so much and there's so much to offer. And if you just limit yourself to, being in the same environment, then you're going to be exposed to the same or similar things over and over again. And then that thirst, that quest, that hunger for difference, you kind of let trickle into other parts of your life where it doesn't need to be. I need to date different people, or I need to do different. No, you need to get out of your comfort zone and be exposed to something that's different and unique, because you may be actually happy with where you are and what you're doing, but you just need a moment or a month or a week or just some time to be exposed to something new. So you're like, oh man, I love this. And I also have an appreciation for where I am. Because that, again, is that balance. It's like, hey, you can travel the world and still love where you're from. Just because you're a worldly person doesn't mean you don't value your foundation, which is where you come from. And you definitely get that from travel. Again, I tell people I travel all the time, and yeah, I don't want to live in America the rest of my life. However, I have an appreciation for where I came from, and I understand the foundation on which my thirst and my love for travel came from. Sorry, that was a lot. I didn't mean to give that much.
No,
But
it's so real though. It's so real. Like, I wear Detroit shirts almost every time I travel just because I have such an appreciation for home. And then, to your point, and it's something I try and highlight with people who are thinking about leaving, is that there are going to be things that you should appreciate, even if you might hate almost all of America. I can guarantee you, when you leave, there are going to be moments and aspects of your life. Maybe you won't miss your life in America, but there are going to be things that you love and appreciate that the US might do well, or you just like because that's your creature comfort, that you will miss when you're somewhere else, like no matter how much you love your new place. And so, like, I try to take that same approach, is like, what is it that I can appreciate about here, and what is it can I appreciate about home? And then that way it's just an appreciation. It's not like a better or a worse, but there's something different that both places offer. So I just wanted to co-sign on that.
oh, absolutely. And thank you. And that kind of leads into my very next question, which is, what are some do's and don'ts from moving and living abroad that you can share for our lovely audience?
The first one that I talk about, like I said, in my club, Living Life Abroad on Clubhouse a lot, is don't go somewhere thinking a tourist visa is how you're going to get, work somewhere. That is a big, big, dangerous one. And if you're thinking, and there's a lot of ways to move abroad, right? There's not one way, but I can almost guarantee you a tourist visa is always not the way. There are nomadic visas a lot of countries have. They have long-term working visas. They have There's all different types of visas. Like, some have all these different letters and numbers and a X13 and whatever. Do your research on visas, because also, if you're like an educator, so if you're looking to be an educator, if a school is talking about bringing you out on a tourist visa, be worried. Start your research. That is a very dangerous thing. There are fines, jail time, and sometimes inability to actually come back to actually work in that country, going somewhere on a tourist visa and then attempting to work, even attempting to look for work. Like, you cannot come to Cayman on a tourist visa and start putting in job applications. Like, that's a big no-no. Like, it's that company will get in trouble and so will you. So really kind of look, at least doing your basic research about that. And if you see a school's talking about sending you on a tourist visa, start to kind of really think about, is this the best school to be at? Why they are. Now, temporary work visa is very different. In a lot of places, that's what you'll get when you initially move, is a temporary work visa. And so then once you're in country, you can get your full work visa. A lot of places won't give you actual work visas until you're in country. And so that's not unusual. But being there on a tourist visa and then people telling you have to make a visa run, those are very risky things to do. And I've been in enough spaces where I've seen people jailed or fined or deported because of it. So that would be my first don't. My first do is to make connections prior to landing. Like, find ways to connect with people before you ever even get in country. And I would say, not just through whoever is you're working, so whether it's a company or a school, make connections there, but also make some that are outside of that. There likely some type of expat group that's there, some type of interest group. So if you're like, hey, I know I'm really into knitting, looking to connect with people on that do knitting. And so like I actually have like this, it's called Tech Tools Abroad. It's something that I share on a regular that people can subscribe to get to, but it has all these different things that you can use to help make connections. The first one, the easiest one, is just go on Facebook. And if you're Black and you're on Facebook, there's probably a group that says brothers and
This is,
sisters,
somewhere.
something, name the city, name the country. But even if you're not, and you're listening to this, you're like, well, I ain't no brother or sister. There's likely, Americans and Canadians and things like that, women of all types of things. So like really just trying to make connections. Sometimes the people in your school can help you with that, like, or your company, and say like, what are some other groups I might be able to connect with prior to me getting there? Because people will help you with small little things like find it. Like the first place I went to get my braids done, which is a very important thing for a Black woman, was what is expensive. And so then like being able to find somebody, now I just found somebody who would come to my house and do it for $75. I was like,
Oh yeah.
yes, please. Like and some of that comes with time, but the more you're able to make connections with people, and like if I were to talk to somebody now I have that information. Oh, hey sis, use her. She really good. Like there's like a company that I use for massages. So really making those connections as early as possible. And then the other I would say is take risks to do things you wouldn't normally do. Like, then I'm not saying things that you're like, I have zero interest, I don't want to do that. I'm not saying that. But like my principal, when I first moved here, he was talking to me about all this wood, how he learned to do all this stuff with wood. And I said, oh, will you make me a desk? He's like, yeah. And he's like, actually, let's make it together. So the desk I'm sitting at right now, I built. And I never would have thought I would tell you that I built a desk. And so there's a few other things. I made a cutting board, and I just taken risk of trying to learn to do new things that I otherwise wouldn't do. So I would say just kind of be willing to do that and try new things, meet new people, go on new adventures. Like I said, the Philippines was not something that was on my list of things to do, but I heard enough people talking about that in Oman. And it was like I kept hearing people just say good things. When people of different cultures, age, and races are all saying something is good and worthwhile, I think it's worth taking a look. Like what's all the hype about? And so that would be another do. And my last don't would be is don't think you know a whole bunch about a place you ain't never been to. I don't care how much you've read, how many podcasts you listen to. I don't care how much research you put into your new place. You still don't know that much because you've never been there. That podcast was recorded and is already in the past, and something about it could be dated and likely has changed. So the people and your experience is different. So like I'm a single Black woman. You may not be a single Black woman in her late 30s who doesn't have any children. Like your situation is different. So your experience with that city could also be different. That country could also be different. But time and space really do change it. When I was in Shanghai, it was amazing. COVID happened, and all my friends are like, don't come back. This is terrible. So, like, and that's just a couple of years how something completely shifted. And so, just don't think that you know a lot just because you watched a bunch of YouTube videos, read a bunch of articles, and you did your homework great, but no, your homework will never beat you being there. And just because you visited also doesn't mean you know. Visiting a place is a very different experience than living in it. And so
Absolutely.
also understanding that your visit may be very glamorized, or you may get the negative end in a visit where you just don't get the same experience until you've been somewhere 6 months. So really giving things time, but knowing that you really don't know as much as you think you know.
And that's very true. I tell people all the time, Taiwan is a great place to live, not the best place to visit. So if you're coming to visit me, no, I'm gonna give you the best real rounded experience I can give you. But it's different between visiting and living. But also like what you said, I tell people, I say, hey, when you do things that you normally wouldn't do, I always say this. If you're under the age of 55, you don't got the sugars, then you should definitely go jump out of an airplane. Because I definitely recommend skydiving to everybody because I was anti skydiving. I was talked into it, and it was the best My stomach, people are, oh, my stomach gonna drop. Your stomach does not drop. It is exhilarating. It is a different level of high that I've ever experienced in life, and I want to do it again before I turn 55. I hope I don't get the sugars, but that's what I will say for sure. Wait, you've been skydiving before?
Yep, I've been skydiving, and it was very similar story. Like somebody, it was so random. They told me like a week before our birthdays were one day apart. He's like, "I'm going for my yada yada birthday. You want to come?" I said, "Hmm, why not? I'm either gonna make it to my next
Yeah,
birthday or not."
right.
And it was a great experience. I'm very much like you. Like I want to do it again. Yeah, I'm mad I didn't pay for the video. I was being cheap. If you do go skydiving,
Get the
pay
video.
for the video.
Yes.
Pay
Worth
for it.
it. I was in Australia
Every
and it was a
penny.
beautiful sunny day, clear sky, and I have the video. And it's something I reshare that video all the time because I'm looking at my face, like the camera's right in your face, and like oh my, and I can literally, it takes me back to that moment and that entire experience where it's like I did some other people say it's crazy, but I had the time of my life and I would certainly do it again. And with that being said, as a solo Black woman living, traveling, and thriving abroad, what does that mean to you, and in what ways do you strive to give back to the community as well?
Oh, so solo Black woman, all of the things you said, it's been rewarding. It's just been such a gift to see and do all the things that I've seen and done. I forget how much I've done. I'm like, oh yeah, I went scuba diving at the Great Barrier Reef. Like that was amazing. And I learned my lesson after not paying for my skydiving. Then I was like, yep, I'm paying for these pictures. I'm paying for this video. Yep, yep, I'm doing it. Um, it's been just amazing. And so part of what I do are things like this, being open to sharing my story, sharing my stumbles, both in public and in private. I've done tons of free calls to help people. Like on my website, you can book 15 minutes free with me, but there have been people who are like, hey, I don't have the money. I need help. But not that I'm encouraging because I am running the business, but I will work with people via email. I've allowed people to sponsor other people. So I've gotten sponsorships in. I have a couple sittings. So if like, hey, I'm serious and I want to do this work to make this possible, I do have some sponsorship money sitting there for people who are willing to put in the work and the effort to get it, make that transition if this is something they want to do. I do a whole lot of other things. Like I work with this organization called Black on Black Education, and we run something called the Teacher Action Board. And so it's not just for Black people, anybody can join, but we curate experiences about learning about like social justice work and how do we do this and how do we become better educators. I started a Jedi, like not started, but like really revamped the Jedi committee at the school and expanded it, got us to start having committees that are actionable towards this work of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Like I'm constantly in a learning space. Like I sit with my TAs and I'm like, hey, here's how I can support you, and getting them like, hey, this is a PD I'm doing. Here's how you apply for the funds through the school and walk them through that process. And here's what the course is like. I'm taking the course too. I'll support you. And this is what this looks like. Here's my screen. Here's how I do it. So like, I really just have a love for people and, wanting to, I want to see people